In the last episode, you heard from Dylan Kim, co-founder and head of marketing at Brevity. Today, on episode number 55, get ready. We're talking to Joe Carr, who's the co-founder and president of kid food brand Serenity Kids, which is, listen up, the fastest growing and fastest selling kid food brand in the United States.
Mhm.
And today we'll be talking about how to use a podcast as a lever of growth for the brand. I'm your host, Raphael Paulin-Daigle, and I'm the founder of SplitBase. Now, this episode is also brought to you by SplitBase. At SplitBase, we help leading 8 and 9 figure brands such as Dr Squatch, Hyperice, Emika, Once Upon a Farm grow through customer-focused conversion optimization programs. Our programs pinpoint exactly where your store is losing money most, and then, well, we help you fix it. The result, well, you get increased conversions, higher AOV, and of course, more money, which then in returns allow you to scale advertising profitably. From customer research, conversion design, strategy, copywriting, development, we focus on growing your e-commerce sales so you can focus on what you do best. So you can go to splitbase.com today to learn about how we can help you get the most out of your marketing spend. All right, Joe, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
For sure. Great to be here.
Now, we've been talking before starting the recording, and you've told me a couple interesting things, which is one, you're the fastest growing and fastest selling baby food brand in the States.
Hmm.
Obviously, that's due to a couple things that you guys are doing really well. And as you know, this podcast is all about going deep and dissecting one key growth strategy for our listeners so they can understand, what works and what doesn't, and they can make changes to their business right away. Now, in your case, the podcast is one of the things that I want to talk about because one, well, I also love podcasts, as I'm sure you can guess. But tell us
Hmm.
a bit more. And I think it's a bit less frequent to see a direct to consumer brand have a podcast that's customer facing, that's used as an acquisition channel. It's not super
Yeah.
common, and I think in 56 episodes, it's the first time we're talking about it. So can you
Hmm.
just maybe give us an overview about how it works?
Yeah. So to be clear, it's other people's podcasts that we've been on that have
Got it.
driven brand's growth. The brand itself does not have its own podcast. I've just launched my personal podcast that the brand is supporting and will
Right.
feed into the brand, and that's brand new, and we'll see what that does. But we have been, my wife, Serenity, co-founder, and I have been on 60 or so podcasts of other people's podcasts. We just say yes to anybody who asks. We also would solicit it from any kind of major influencer that either had kids or maybe at some point talked about kids or baby food. And we basically became the baby episode for a lot of
Mm,
these health and wellness podcasters. And because as baby food, our customer has a short lifespan. It's, they only buy baby food 6 months to 18 months old. We have to consistently reacquire that customer. So essentially being available when a mom or a dad goes to search for baby food and they find us, that's been critical for us to be able to be found early on. So being on really prominent health and wellness podcasts, their listeners would often go say, "Hey, I wonder if my favorite influencer, Ben Greenfield's a great example. Ben Greenfield's one of our
yeah.
most top performing permanent advertisements on the internet, basically. We didn't pay anything for it. We're guests on his podcast. People search him or they search his podcast, they find us, they listen to it, and then they become customers. And they click through his link and they get the discount, and he gets affiliate revenue from that. And so he's just consistently getting affiliate revenue for years since we've been on that podcast, and continues to grow. And Ben Greenfield, you wouldn't think of him as like a mom, a lot of moms listening to him, but apparently they do. I guess, he takes his shirt off and, women love that.
I was
Yeah.
with him at a mastermind just last month, and I can confirm that all he talks about is actually family, and also he's always just shirt off. So,
Yes, yes. So moms love that.
so Joe, I'd love to know what kind of impact that's had on the business because obviously this is something that requires a lot of effort. And then I want to talk about maybe the strategies and how you guys approach it. But just to really nail down the value of it, can you tell us a bit more about what type of impact it's had on the business?
Having launched online and continued to grow an e-commerce business alongside the retail business, customer acquisition cost is the name of the game all the time. How do you lower CAC all day long? And ads have a certain CAC. We always get a 2.5 lifetime to revenue to CAC ratio. So we're always going at least that. Amazon, we've now switched to a 6 month payback. So we'll advertise as long as we make that money back within 6 months. And that's actually really grown the business. So, but how we lower that CAC is always key. And so one of those, our lowest CAC are unpaid promotions. So affiliates are amazing because they promote us. They only get paid if they make a
Yeah.
sale. The amount they get is so much, they only get paid on the first sale. And so that little discount and the discount to the customer plus them, and then we have a really high return rate. So as long as you have a good
Mm.
uh, return purchase rate, which any successful product or brand must have. You can't go only off a first purchase anyway. Then it's worth it to invest in this. And affiliates have been huge. And things like being on a podcast, that's like it's evergreen. It's
Yeah.
out there forever. And whenever a mom goes and searches for baby food, they'll find us there and buy.
I'd love to know, uh, is there a strategy, right? Like, I think a lot of people probably just think, oh, we get invited on podcasts, we show up, and that's it. But, I'm thinking, like, what about the topics that you will go and talk about on those podcasts? And even on your podcast, the topics that you choose, right? How do you find and select those? And is there a strategy, or you're just really trying to talk about anything that's relevant to your audience?
I'd say there's sort of three major strategies. I mean, one of the key one is you have to be an expert. You have to present yourself and actually be very, very, very well educated on the topic that is super relevant to your product. So my wife became very much a baby food and infant nutrition expert. She read everything there was to read, really, really educated herself. And so she was an expert on that topic. And then that niche topic of babies and baby food was something that a lot of health and wellness influencers hadn't covered in any direct way, and maybe had come in different ways. But we found that way. It's like, hey, we'll be your baby episode. So kind of find that white space, if you will, in a podcaster's regimen. And for us, that was mostly babies. So, you could do it one at a time if you wanted. Look through that podcaster's episodes and say, what are you missing? And pitch them that. But then it's a lot of asking. It's just asking and offering. It's just being very assertive about saying, we're available. We'd like to do this. We notice you don't have a baby episode. We think your audience would really like it. Send them free product. They say not now. You ask them again later. Like if they don't answer at all, you just keep asking until they answer. So just like essentially not being shy about
Hmm.
writing very big influencers, who maybe sometimes require you to pay or whatever. Sometimes they'd ask us to pay money. We just say, no, we can't afford that, but we're happy to give you affiliate revenue. And sometimes they'd hold to their guns and say, no, we're only paid. But like others would be like, okay, it's cool. I don't have a baby episode. You guys are new. I want to help you out. And they make exceptions.
Love it. Now, we're talking about affiliate commissions for those podcasters. I'm curious of what happens in between, right? So, where do you send people to, or where does those podcasts host send people to? Do you have, we actually talked about entry offers with Shireen O'Bear, who was, I think, former, I could be wrong here, but VP of e-commerce of Bobby, the baby formula
Mhm.
brand. I
Yeah.
think a couple episodes ago, and she talked about entry offer has been key for them, and they usually would package things. I'm curious here in your case, have you found a set of products that it's best to send people to from podcasts? What's the strategy for the actual conversion?
We have not gotten that sophisticated on what specific product offering to send them to. Our meat, baby foods are our top selling, so those tend
Mm,
to be what people go for. But there's depending what stage and how old their baby is and what they're eating already, and so we've not really dialed in that like this is what you should buy first time
right.
ever. I think as we get more sophisticated, that is a better strategy to say what to direct a customer very clearly to a certain checkout. We have like 35 products, so it's very, very hard to know what to send them to, and they all
Yeah.
sell well. So like we haven't figured that out, but otherwise we just send them to the main product page. We played around with homepage versus product page and have landed on product page. So they go to the just the main product page, and then they can search by category or they can see everything. Bestsellers are at the top. So we rank that product page by bestsellers, and that works really well. So kind of the bestsellers are sort of
Mm.
and there's like three or four different groupings of that, the best-selling meats and the best-selling veggies and the best-selling snacks. And so they can self-select by category there. But mostly, yeah, they have their affiliate link. It gives them 15%. That gives the customer 15% discount, and then it gives the affiliate 25% commission off the first order.
Are there things that you've noticed that when showing up on these podcasts, are there things, or is there a strategy in what you say? Is there anything that you will make sure to say on every single episode, that will, lead or correlate with an increase in sales? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think, there's the how and the what. Obviously being very authentic, being very genuine, being very honest. We are parents. We made these for our daughter. My wife personally did the research. So there's this kind of like there's a trust factor
Yeah.
that being on a podcast really, oh, and then the podcaster also validates that you're valuable because they had you on. So that shows some amount of trust, and people really want to trust their brand partners, especially for babies. And then the what, we always talk about meat because it's such an important
Mm.
food for babies, and it's still a lot of confusion around when you can feed meat and how important is it, and so like talking about how meat is key as a key first food for babies is huge. We love talking about regenerative agriculture. I'll shout about regenerative agriculture every chance I get because it's just one of the major solutions to climate change. The meat's superior. It's a growing movement. We've got to support those farmers. There's a lot of anti-meat sentiment in the environmental
Mm.
movement that needs to be counteracted with the regenerative focus of it's not no meat, it's the right meat actually improves the planet. So those are two pieces that we always try to cover. But otherwise, yeah, just being real.
Hmm. Yeah, I think for our listeners, a couple takeaways here is one, the point of going on a podcast is really not to think about selling or trying to sell through the podcast. What I'm getting here is really about being an expert, having a conversation around educating. When we think of marketing, let's say you build a landing page, you build a marketing campaign, you're always going to think about what's the problem that we're solving and how are we solving it. What I'm getting, I think, Joe, from what you're saying as well, is you're almost doing this without necessarily talking too much about your product. You're just really highlighting and making people aware of the problem, at the end of the
Yeah,
day,
that's right.
and ultimately you guys are a solution to it. uh
Yes.
so I think that's very smart. Now, I'm also curious, like, now obviously there's a network effect. You've been on a lot of podcasts, you and your wife, and now you're getting invited, but how did you first start that strategy? Obviously, the business has been running for many years, so there's credibility there. But how do you go from, not doing any podcasts to
Hmm.
being an invited guest on podcasts like Ben Greenfield's podcast?
Yeah, our product was formed from me reading the 4 Hour Work Week, Tim Ferriss's
Mm.
4 Hour Work Week. And one of the key things there was you pick a niche community to launch a product in. You pick a niche that you're a member of that has a gap, you fill the gap, you market that gap to that niche community, and then you outsource the reproduction. And in his model, you just sell to that niche community forever.
Yep.
So for us, it was paleo. We were big in the paleo movement. It was
Interesting.
2016. Paleo was really peaking, and we were going to paleo conferences, and there were all these paleo influencers, and that was the thing. So we were going to be like the paleo baby food. And essentially, we were the paleo baby food. We just ended up not calling it that or tying ourselves too closely to that niche, fortunately, because it kind of went down. But we were springboard. We were able to springboard into the online and e-commerce communities via that very strong paleo, which had a lot of e-commerce businesses, had a lot of influencers, had a lot of podcasts. So we were the first paleo baby food. So that really got us on some very big podcasts early on because we were the only paleo baby food. We were
Mm.
the first paleo baby food. The paleo movement was very supportive of each other. Like it wasn't that big. And so if you were doing something really cool, they were inclined to give you a spot without charging you a lot of money. And so we really had that opportunity. So a lot of affiliates, a lot of influencers, a lot of podcasters brought us on really early on because they had no baby food to promote. They were promoting all this other stuff, and everybody loves babies. And anybody who's remotely educated on nutrition knows how important
Yeah.
that first year of life is. So these very smart influencers were like, "Whoa, this is a huge gap. I already noticed it. You're finally filling it. Let's have you on and talk about that because I've been wanting something to do this for years."
Amazing. Um, we're already hitting almost our time, but I still want to talk a little bit about the podcast you recently started.
Sure.
It is not a podcast that is owned by the brand necessarily, as you said, but it's still, I'm guessing there is still a purpose to that podcast, which is
Yes,
attached to your personal brand. And the goal is for it to feed into the brand. So can you
that's
tell
right.
us a bit more about the strategy and maybe what are some of the learnings that you've had so far?
Yeah, I have a lot to say. I've always had a lot to say. I drove my marketing department crazy trying to be my personal voice, and they're like, "We got to be the voice of the brand." And some of the stuff you say is good, but some is like a little not on brand enough. So I want to change the world for kids. I had a really tough childhood, so I really want to. I've always wanted to change the world for kids, change the way we teach kids, treat kids. When I became a parent, I realized I want to change the world for parents. So like I can only do so much of that through a baby food brand, social media and advertising and blogs and so forth. And so as soon as I was able to step back from the brand a little bit. That was what I wanted to do. And so the brand has funded the launch of Dedicated Joe. And we did research. We hired a little PR firm to research where is the white space in the dad influencer space and determined that there was a big white space in this kind of 0 to 1 year old, this first time dads. I just had a baby.
Mm,
What the hell do I do? There's, a lot of dads talk very broadly about being a dad. Even moms don't really talk that much about that postpartum time. There's just so much else to talk about. So I'm going to go real hard on first time dads right at the beginning of you have a baby, your life's transformed, your wife's transformed, your body's changing, everything's happening. It's very disruptive and what are the really just concrete tips and tricks to get through that very difficult, what they call the postpartum era, or the fourth trimester, but also like how the emotional spiritual transformation of becoming the identity of becoming a dad that really you start to set into in that first year, and that kind of sets the tone for the rest of your dadhood. So that's Dedicated Joe podcast launched just last week. So we've got an episode a week coming. We've got social posts, 3 social posts a week coming. A lot of amazing guests lined up that are all very successful men who are also dads talking
mm.
about that postpartum experience.
I'm curious, Joe, like obviously you guys have been able to do all this podcasting stuff because you are the founders and the faces of the brand. Do you think it's doable with a brand that doesn't have a founder that wants to be, at the forefront of the brand? Do you think it's doable maybe with an employee, with someone doing it?
A good question. There's a lot of credibility being the founder, the creator. I think it's worth a try to, in terms of if they're genuinely an expert. You could say, well, I'm the senior science advisor, or I'm the, product development. Like you could
Yeah.
probably position oneself as an expert on that niche topic if you go really hard on the topic. And if there's a big enough white space, there's not a lot of experts on that topic. You could probably get away with it. We were fortunate to be able to speak. And my wife's actually quite introverted, but she's done a lot of speaking training and so forth and was
Mm,
able to learn how to do it. So I've heard a lot of PR people work on just teaching founders how to do that better.
yeah.
Because the founder just, even if they're not naturally charismatic, they are very smart. They know
Mm,
their product, they know their brand really well. And so that authenticity on a podcast, it's a lot easier to draw that out in a
oh yeah.
podcast format than it is in like, say, like a stage speech or a short video. And so I'd say, yeah, like try to work with your founder, teach them how to do it. It's kind of like you sort of what you sign up for.
Yeah, I do think it's probably worth noting though that that person needs to want it, right? Like I think it's going to be very hard to like show up on a podcast and talk about this and talk with other people if that person is really just doesn't want to do that. So that's
Right.
probably step number one.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Maybe bring on a co-founder, maybe call them a co-founder. Find a co-founder that is the
yep.
spokesperson and just call them a co-founder. That'd be a good little trick. What is a founder, co-founder? What does that even mean? A lot of people call themselves co-founders, so that would be a way around that.
Yeah, like I know Ben Greenfield's brand Keon, right? I actually saw a lot of videos recently where Angelo Keely, who might also be co-founder, but I've always known him as a CEO, and he's been talking about amino acids and ads and all over the
Yes.
place and in podcasts. I thought that was pretty interesting. I didn't initially associate as co-founder, but he might
A
actually
lot
be.
of brands do that. They bring on a
Yeah.
already prominent influencer and they call them a co-founder. The image is as if this person created this from scratch. Very rarely did that happen. Some other very sciencey or entrepreneurial person created it, but then
Yeah.
obviously the influencer has to fully be behind it. You can't just pay them to do it. They have to believe in it. But like if they believe in it enough and then you cut them in with equity or some way from the very beginning and then they start being the voice, I've seen a lot of really successful products piggyback off successful influencers.
Very true. Now, there is one thing, we're unfortunately already out of time, but there is one thing I want to call out to our audience, which has, this is episode number 55. I think I said 56 earlier, 55. And there's a common pattern, there's a trend across every single interview, and it's definitely seen here, which is understanding your audience is what allows you to have success with
Yes.
these methodologies.
Yes.
Truly understanding their pains, their needs, what they want to hear. Afterwards, how you communicate is up to you, whether that's a podcast, it's through ads, it's a blog, but every brand that's scaled fast, that's scaled profitably, are those that understood their customers the best.
Yes. And that starts at the product development stage. Serenity and I both had failed businesses previously, and they failed because we started businesses doing what we wanted to do.
Mm,
We tried to find people to buy it or pay for that. And it's much harder. With baby food, we didn't want to make a baby food. We just wanted baby food that was good and healthy. And we discovered there was a huge lack of it. And everybody we asked was like, yeah, we want that too. So it started from this consumer need that we then filled. And we were very humble around like, well, we kind of know what we would want, but there's a wide variety within that would meet our needs. So what meets the widest needs of the customer? So we did that, and then we'd be able to, through performance marketing, they tell you very quickly whether they want it or not. They either click on it or they don't. They buy or they don't. So you get this instant feedback with performance marketing that you don't get with kind of larger awareness or brand marketing. We did a lot of trade shows as well, so that we really got to
mm.
talk to people. A lot of other food brands do demos in stores, which you can't do for baby food, but we did it at trade shows. We just spent the extra money, and it didn't really make sense for our brand to do trade shows because we're reaching hundreds of people and we need to reach thousands. But it was great for that, like getting to the customer, understanding the
Mm,
questions they ask. That was one of the ways we learned that meat wasn't as ubiquitous as we thought. In the paleo movement, meat was everything.
interesting.
But like the more we talk to people, they're like, meat for babies? Can they even have meat? Like, what age can they have meat? We're like, okay, now we know we need to educate on meat, which has worked. Like people really understand
I love
that
it.
babies need meat now. But yeah, everything should be for the customer, not for you.
We've been talking to Joe Carr, who's co-founder and president at Serenity Kids. Now, Joe, if people want to learn more about you, the brand, your podcast, where should
Hmm.
they go?
Yeah, you can check out our website, myserenitykids.com. We're also all on Amazon, so you can search our products on Amazon and almost every retail store you can find our products. And then for me, dadicatedjoe.com or Dedicated Joe on all podcast platforms, as well as at Dedicated Joe on all socials.
Amazing, Joe. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks.